I'm not someone who typically follows rules. I've always had a rebellious streak, a kind of quiet defiance that led me to bend or break rules when I felt like it. So when I first saw the list of rules pinned to the inside of the door in my new apartment, I didn't think much of it. It seemed like another overly cautious landlord being uptight, but nothing I couldn't ignore. Little did I know, those rules would soon become my only hope of survival. It started when I moved into a new apartment in a small town. I had been looking for something cheap, off the beaten path, a place where I could work from home and not be bothered by nosy neighbors. This old building, tucked into a quiet corner of town, was perfect. The rent was almost suspiciously low, but after seeing the state of the place, chipped paint, creaky floors, and a somewhat eerie atmosphere, I figured I was getting what I paid for. The landlord, a man in his 60s named Mr. Ellis, seemed friendly enough, though there was something off about him. He had a nervous energy, like he was always waiting for something to go wrong. When I signed the lease, he handed me a small pamphlet along with the keys. "This," he said, his voice serious in a way that caught me off guard, "is the rule book. You need to follow every rule in here. No exceptions." I almost laughed, thinking he was just one of those landlords with too many rules about noise levels and when to take the trash out. But when I opened the pamphlet, the rules weren't the standard fare. They were strange. The rule book: do not open the windows after 8 p.m., no matter how warm or stuffy it gets. Keep the windows closed. Something bad will happen if you don't. Keep the closet door in your bedroom shut at all times. If you wake up and find it open, do not look inside. Just shut it and go back to bed immediately. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., you may hear knocking on your front door. Do not open it. No matter how loud it gets, do not open the door during this time. Once a week, leave a bowl of salt in the kitchen overnight. Replace it every week and do not use the salt for anything else. If you hear footsteps in the hallway at night, do not investigate. Lock your door and stay in bed. They will pass by eventually. When using the bathroom at night, do not look in the mirror for too long. Something might look back at you. Every month, on the 13th, burn a candle in the living room at exactly midnight. Do not let it go out before 1 a.m. I looked up from the pamphlet, my brow furrowed. Mr. Ellis was watching me, his eyes pleading. "I know it sounds strange, but it's important," he said quietly. "People who don't follow the rules, well, bad things happen." "Right," I muttered, folding the pamphlet and shoving it into my pocket. "I'll keep that in mind." The first few days in the apartment were uneventful. I unpacked, settled into my routine, and mostly forgot about the rules. They seemed absurd, like some kind of prank or scare tactic to keep tenants in line. I laughed them off as I fixed up the place, thinking Mr. Ellis was just an eccentric old man. But then things started happening. Small things at first. One night, as I sat on the couch watching TV, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. It was late, well past midnight, and the sound was unsettling. The steps were slow, deliberate, and heavy, too heavy to belong to any of the neighbors I had seen so far. I paused the show and listened closely, but the footsteps stopped right outside my door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the footsteps started again, slowly moving away. I shook it off as some late-night walker or a neighbor with a heavy tread. No big deal. I wasn't about to get paranoid over some footsteps. Besides, the rule about footsteps in the hallway seemed too ridiculous to take seriously. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night to find the closet door in my bedroom slightly ajar. My stomach dropped as I remembered the rule: keep the closet door shut at all times. I stared at the dark crack of the door, feeling an irrational wave of fear wash over me. I could have sworn I had closed it before going to bed. For a long minute, I debated whether or not to get up and shut the door. The room felt oppressively silent, like even the usual hum of the city had died down, leaving only the sound of my breathing. I told myself it was nothing, just my overactive imagination getting the better of me. But then I saw it. A shadow moved inside the closet, shifting slightly behind the door. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't the shadow of clothes or boxes, something far too solid to be explained away by normal objects. I froze, staring at the door, my mind racing. The rule was clear: if the closet door is open, don't look inside. Just shut it and go back to bed. Summoning all my courage, I stood up, walked over to the door without looking too closely, and shut it. My hand was shaking as I turned the knob, securing it in place. Then I hurried back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a frightened child. The rest of the night passed in tense silence, but nothing else happened. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there, something that had been watching me. That's when I started taking the rules seriously. Maybe it was all a coincidence, just tricks of the mind, but I wasn't willing to risk it anymore. Every night, I made sure the windows were closed before 8 p.m., kept the closet door securely shut, and didn't investigate any strange noises. I even followed the more bizarre rules, like leaving a bowl of salt in the kitchen once a week. I couldn't explain why, but the atmosphere in the apartment seemed to change after that. The air felt heavier, like something unseen was always lurking just beneath the surface. The strange occurrences didn't stop, but they didn't escalate either. It was as if following the rules kept whatever malevolent force was in the apartment at bay. But then I made a mistake. It was a Thursday, about 2 weeks after I had moved in, when I broke one of the rules. I hadn't meant to. It was just a moment of absent-mindedness. I was working late into the night, finishing up a project for my job. By the time I finished, it was nearly 2 a.m., and I was exhausted. I decided to head to bed without thinking about the time, not realizing I was cutting it dangerously close to the dreaded hour mentioned in the rulebook. As I lay in bed, my mind was still buzzing from work. I was on the verge of falling asleep when I heard the knock on the front door. My eyes snapped open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The rule had been clear. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., you may hear knocking. Do not open the door. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 a.m. The knocking came again, louder this time. A slow, deliberate knock that echoed through the silent apartment. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there frozen. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to follow the rule, but something about the knock was different. It wasn't frantic or threatening. It was almost polite. A part of me, the curious part that always got me into trouble, whispered that it wouldn't hurt to check. Just a quick look through the peephole to see who or what was knocking. After all, it could have been a neighbor in trouble or someone who needed help. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the knot of fear tightening in my stomach. Quietly, I crept to the front door. The knocking had stopped, but I could feel something or someone on the other side. My hand hovered over the door handle for a moment before I decided to take the safer route. I leaned in and pressed my eye to the peephole, expecting to see an empty hallway or, at worst, one of my neighbors standing outside. But what I saw wasn't a person. Standing on the other side of the door was a figure, tall and gaunt, with skin so pale it almost glowed in the darkness. Its face was pressed close to the door, its eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly into the peephole. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, but I could feel its eyes boring into me, as if it could see me through the door. For a moment, I stood there, paralyzed by fear, before the knocking started again. This time, it was louder, harder. The door rattled on its hinges as the figure knocked over and over, its face still pressed against the peephole. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the door, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. My hands were shaking as I backed away from the door, retreating to my bedroom. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers over me, trying to calm my racing heart. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for any signs that the figure had returned. The next morning, I told myself it had been a bad dream, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I knew better. The figure at the door had been real, and I had broken the rule. For the next few days, I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting something terrible to happen. But nothing did. The footsteps in the hallway came and went, the closet door stayed shut, and the windows remained closed after 8 p.m. Everything seemed normal. I started to relax, convincing myself that maybe I hadn't broken the rule after all. I hadn't opened the door after all. Maybe the figure had just been a hallucination, a product of my tired mind. Then, one night, everything changed. It was a Friday night, and I had just finished my weekly ritual of replacing the bowl of salt in the kitchen. I had gotten into the habit of checking the rules every night before bed, just to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything. The rule book had become like a Bible to me, something I clung to for safety and sanity. That night, I crawled into bed, the familiar weight of dread settling over me as I waited for the strange noises to start. But instead of hearing footsteps in the hallway or a knock on the door, I heard something else, a whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind outside, but as I lay there, the whisper grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the closet. My blood turned cold as I remembered the rule: if the closet door opens, do not look inside. Just shut it and go back to bed. But the closet door was closed. I had made sure of it. The whispering continued, growing more insistent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, almost desperate. It sounded like a child, calling out for help from inside the closet. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, staring at the closet door. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew the rule, but the voice was so human. It didn't sound like a monster or a ghost. It sounded like someone trapped, scared, and alone. I couldn't ignore it. Against my better judgment, I got out of bed and crept toward the closet. The whispering grew louder as I approached, but the words were still unintelligible, like a voice just out of reach. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know. Slowly, I opened the door.
At first, I didn't see anything. The closet was dark, the usual clutter of clothes and boxes piled up in the small space. But as I peered deeper into the shadows, something moved.
I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There, crouched in the back of the closet, was a figure. It was small, almost childlike, but its limbs were twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes wide and unblinking glowed faintly in the dark. The figure slowly lifted its head, its eyes locking onto mine. The whispering stopped. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us moving. Then, with a sudden, jerky motion, the figure lunged at me. I screamed and slammed the closet door shut, throwing myself back against the wall. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to lock the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. The whispering returned, louder now, more insistent. The door rattled as the figure pounded against it, trying to get out. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I had broken the rule. I had looked inside the closet, and now whatever was in there wanted out. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my bedroom, clutching the rule book in my hands, praying that the door would hold. The next day, I packed my bags and left the apartment. I didn't tell Mr. Ellis, didn't bother with the lease or my security deposit. I just ran. I never went back. It's been months since I left that apartment, but I can't escape what happened. I can still hear the whispering sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long. I still wake up in a cold sweat, expecting to see the figure from the closet standing at the foot of my bed. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to know. All I know is that the rules were there for a reason, and I broke them. Now, I live in constant fear that something will follow me, that I'll hear a knock at my door in the middle of the night, or find my closet door open again. And this time, I won't be able to close it.